The clock was ticking down, the air in the chamber thick enough to taste. Marco Rubio's voice cracked through the silence like a whip, sharp and smug, his words ricocheting off marble walls built to echo authority. He leaned forward, every syllable dripping with practiced indignation, eyes scanning the room not for truth but for cameras. He spoke of responsibility, of leadership, of wasted taxpayer dollars, his tone rising as if sheer volume could disguise the hollowness beneath. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. Her stillness was its own kind of defiance. No flinch, no frown, no flicker of distraction. Just focus. Her gaze was steady, her breath measured, the quiet before the ignition. Rubio gestured wildly, papers rustling in his hand, a performance of outrage rehearsed for sound bites and headlines. He accused, he demanded, he called her uninformed, emotional, partisan. Each word landed like sparks against stone. And still, Crockett didn't move. Behind her calm eyes was a calculation that only those who fought for every inch of their voice truly know. The room watched, some pretending not to. Staffers shifted in their seats. Aides avoided eye contact. Everyone could feel it, the collision coming. Then a voice from nowhere, the narrator's whisper beneath the tension. What you're about to see is not theater. It's a test of the nation's soul. Cameras captured the moment, the tilt of Rubio's jaw, the unbroken stare from Crockett, the faint tremor of realization that he might have just gone too far. The sound faded, replaced by heartbeat rhythm. Somewhere beyond these walls, millions were watching live, unaware they were witnessing history's hinge. The narrator's voice returned, almost reverent now. Millions would soon replay this moment frame by frame, searching for the exact second power began to crumble. In the chamber, Rubio smirked, certain of his dominance. Crockett blinked once, slow and deliberate, as if sealing the scene in memory. The silence stretched, fragile and electric, the kind that lives forever in replay. But what led to this explosion of truth was a crisis too many tried to bury. Rewind just a few hours before the clash, before the chamber thickened with that unbearable silence. The Senate hearing had been called to address a crisis no one could afford to ignore anymore, though plenty had tried. Florida's insurance market was collapsing in real time. Families were losing homes not to hurricanes, but to paperwork. Rates had tripled, companies had fled, and the so-called Sunshine State was drowning in the shadow of its own neglect. The hearing was meant to find answers. Instead, it became a battlefield. The cameras had already started rolling when the first testimonies began. Charts, statistics, polite warnings, all the familiar rituals of bureaucracy. But beneath it, there was panic. Real people were bleeding through the numbers, single mothers driving through flooded streets, retirees sleeping in cars after their coverage evaporated overnight, families watching their roofs cave in while politicians debated adjectives. You could almost feel the disconnect widening between those living the crisis and those pretending to solve it. Then a shift. The narration breaks the invisible wall, reaching through the screen, pulling the viewer in. Tell me, where are you watching from right now? Because this story, this arrogance, this theater of excuses affects every American paying for broken promises. Every policyholder, every taxpayer, every person who's ever been told to wait their turn while the powerful rewrite the rules.
The scene cuts between moments. Clips of storm-battered homes, shuttered offices, empty lots where families once stood. The voice continues, measured but burning with urgency. This isn't just about Florida. This is about what happens when leadership forgets responsibility, when politicians become performance art and accountability becomes a punchline. In the hearing room, Rubio's polished confidence filled the air. He called it market correction. Others called it collapse. He blamed red tape, woke agendas, bad actors, the language of avoidance. The committee members nodded, some half listening, some waiting for the sound bites they could clip later. But on the other side of the dais, Jasmine Crockett's expression never changed. She was listening not to his words, but to what they revealed, the arrogance of someone who had never felt the storm himself. Florida's disaster wasn't a localized failure. It was a mirror, a reflection of a national rot where profit had replaced principle and denial masqueraded as strength. The narrator's voice softened, almost pleading now. These hearings are supposed to bring answers, but when the same hands writing the rules are the ones cashing the checks, who do you trust? Cut to faces, families displaced, insurance agents dodging calls, volunteers stacking sandbags and rising water. The divide was no longer political, it was moral. Crockett understood that. For her, the hearing wasn't just policy, it was a promise to the people who couldn't afford to be forgotten again. She waited. She watched. She let him talk himself into the hole he couldn't see forming beneath him. Because at the center of that crisis, one man was convinced his noise could drown out the tide. Marco Rubio had always understood one thing better than most politicians: how to sound confident, even when the ground beneath him was giving way. His sentences moved like polished stones, smooth, weighty, and carefully arranged, but they were often hollow when cracked open. To the untrained ear, he could sound like conviction itself, the embodiment of certainty in a chaotic world. But to those listening closely, it was all performance. Noise shaped like conviction. A man selling steadiness while quietly trembling behind the podium. He had spent years mastering the rhythm of outrage. His sentences came preloaded with applause lines, designed to trend, to clip well, to echo across social media feeds as if they were gospel. He knew when to raise his eyebrows, when to pause for effect, when to let the room catch up to his righteousness. It was an art form, the illusion of authenticity, rehearsed to perfection. Every syllable calculated, every glance measured. But even the best performance begins to crumble when the set itself starts collapsing. Florida was collapsing. The irony was almost cinematic. Here was a man railing against regulation while begging for federal funds to clean up the wreckage of deregulation. He dismissed climate urgency as alarmism while his own coastline disappeared beneath rising tides. He called accountability partisan theater, while watching insurers flee his state one by one. It was hypocrisy dressed as confidence. Yet he never flinched, because in his mind, the performance mattered more than the product. Optics over outcomes.
He carried himself like someone born to lead, but every word betrayed a deeper insecurity. He spoke of responsibility as though he invented it, yet his record was a string of evasions. Votes ducked, hearings skipped, crises ignored. He was the man standing on a crumbling seawall, yelling at the tide to stop rising, pretending that volume could hold back inevitability. The louder the ocean roared, the louder he spoke, because silence, for him, was the sound of irrelevance. To his supporters, he was still the golden boy, sharp suit, sharper sound bites, the promise of a steady hand in stormy times. But beneath the polish, there was fatigue. Years of defending contradictions had worn him thin, though he'd never admit it. He mocked climate advocates, even as federal disaster funds lined his press releases. He denounced woke politics while posting photos of storm survivors he barely visited. He had become a walking contradiction, the man of faith with selective compassion, the leader who only showed up when the cameras did. And yet, in rooms like this one, the Senate chamber where words carry weight, his confidence always seemed to swell.
He believed if he controlled the noise, he controlled the narrative. He mistook motion for momentum, applause for agreement. He believed dominance came from interruption, not understanding. But arrogance always carries blindness. It forgets that the louder you yell, the easier it is to hear the fear hiding behind the sound. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett, still silent, still steady. He didn't notice her yet, not really. He saw her as another opponent to out-talk, another headline to dominate, another clip to conquer. He couldn't see what she was doing, studying, waiting, measuring the tempo of his noise. She had no need to match his volume. She had something far more dangerous, timing. In his world, silence meant weakness. In hers, it was strategy. Every second he spent filling the air was another second he built her case for her. And as he leaned forward, his hands slicing the air, his voice bouncing off the chamber walls, the cracks began to show. The rhythm faltered. The rehearsed passion started to sound forced. The mask of control slipped just enough to reveal what he'd fought hardest to hide. That beneath the layers of authority and certainty, there was fear. Fear of being challenged by someone who didn't play by his rules. The scene hung suspended in irony. The senator who mistook the microphone for power, and the congresswoman who understood that silence, when wielded right, could be its undoing. He didn't realize he was standing across from someone who had mastered the art of silence. But arrogance always forgets silence can be the sharpest blade. The night before the hearing, Jasmine Crockett's office lights still burned long after the hallways had emptied. Stacks of folders lined her desk. Insurance complaints, flood damage reports, letters from families who had lost everything but hope. The clock read past midnight, but exhaustion was a luxury she could not afford. She read each testimony with the same focus she once gave to witness statements back in her law practice, tracing every line until the story beneath the paperwork emerged. These weren't statistics to her, they were lives, people who had done everything right and were still left behind. In another life, she might have gone home, closed her laptop, and slept. But public service was not a job she stumbled into. It was a promise she made to herself years ago, when the world taught her what happens when the powerless stay unheard. Every case she fought, every speech she gave, every question she posed on the Hill was built on that foundation. It wasn't pedigree that got her here. It was persistence. It was the late nights studying case law at a kitchen table she could barely afford, the sound of passing trains outside a cheap apartment window marking the hours she traded for purpose.
The story cuts back to those early days. A younger Crockett in a crowded courtroom, voice steady against a wall of noise. Lawyers twice her age tried to talk over her. Judges tried to rush her. But she learned early that the calmest person in the room always wins. That composure wasn't passive. It was power disguised as patience. The same patience she now carried into Congress, honed sharp as glass. When she spoke to constituents, she didn't lecture. She listened first, spoke second. Her words landed like anchors, solid, deliberate, grounded in truth. She had a gift for cutting through the fog of political theater with something rarer, clarity. She could speak about insurance reform or climate accountability with the same plain-spoken empathy she used at town halls and food drives. To her, representation meant standing shoulder to shoulder with those who couldn't buy access. Behind closed doors, colleagues underestimated her composure. They mistook grace for softness, empathy for naivety. But the people who knew her best understood the truth. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to raise her voice to command a room.
She carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd already survived louder battles. Her calm wasn't the absence of fire, it was the control of it. In committee rooms, she'd watched the way power performed itself, the practiced interruptions, the exaggerated disbelief, the smug laughter meant to diminish. She'd been through it all before, in courtrooms where she was the only woman of color, in meetings where her questions were brushed aside until a man repeated them. Every moment of dismissal became another layer of armor. She learned to weaponize patience, to let arrogance burn itself out. That's why when the Florida insurance hearing came, she didn't walk in to perform. She came to reveal. Every fact she carried, every document in her folder, every number she memorized wasn't ammunition. It was truth waiting to be spoken at the exact right moment. Her weapon wasn't rage, it was precision. The narrator's voice slows, reverent. Picture her walking into the Senate chamber that morning, head high, expression calm, a quiet storm wrapped in navy blue. She knows what's coming. Another man with power mistaking volume for validation. She's seen that script 1,000 times. But this time, she's not playing along. She's rewriting the ending. Her composure disarms before it strikes. That's what makes her dangerous in rooms like this. While others chase headlines, she chases accountability. While others seek applause, she seeks truth. It's why the people watching at home, tired of being dismissed, see themselves in her. Someone unbent by intimidation, unwilling to let power rewrite pain into politics. In that moment before the confrontation, there is quiet, a cinematic stillness, like the world inhaling before a storm. She flips through her notes, not because she needs to read them, but because she's preparing to listen. She knows that the loudest one will always reveal himself first, and when he does, she'll be ready not with noise, but with the one thing that can't be shouted down: fact. Outside, the cameras flash, reporters whisper, and the machinery of politics hums along, unaware that something rare is about to happen. A reckoning is coming, wrapped not in fury, but in composure. It's the kind of moment history doesn't predict, but remembers. The kind that begins quietly and ends everywhere. And soon, the calmest person in the room would face the loudest. The Senate floor was packed, cameras trained on the long table where witnesses and senators faced one another under the cold fluorescence of government light. Papers shuffled, microphones flickered. The air buzzed with the hum of tension no one wanted to name. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her papers, ready to speak, when Rubio cut in. His voice came smooth, familiar, and faintly amused. "Congresswoman, I appreciate your passion," he began, leaning back in his chair like a man certain of his superiority. "But maybe if you understood how insurance markets actually function, you'd realize this isn't about corruption, it's about economics."
The words fell heavy with condescension, dressed up as civility. Crockett didn't respond. Her hands rested flat on the table, her gaze steady. Rubio continued, emboldened by her silence. He talked faster, throwing acronyms and financial jargon like confetti, loss ratios, actuarial tables, market deregulation, trying to bury truth under terminology. He talked, she listened. He mocked, she smiled. Every repetition chipped away at his control. His words began to blur, the rhythm of his speech tightening into something desperate. He was explaining, defending, preaching to no one in particular. The staffers behind him shifted uncomfortably, sensing what he couldn't. Every sentence made the room lean closer to her, not him. Rubio leaned forward, smirk widening. "See, this is the problem. You come here with emotion, not data. You want to talk about victims? Fine. But this isn't a charity hearing. It's economics, supply and demand."
A flicker, barely a movement, passed across Crockett's face. Not anger, calculation. She didn't look at him, just down at her notes, as if deciding whether he was worth the time it would take to dismantle him. The silence stretched, bending the air. He kept talking. His tone rose, frustration seeping through the polish. "You don't seem to understand how risk pools work. You can't just—" A senator nearby coughed, glancing toward Crockett, waiting. The gallery was silent now, the kind of silence that feels like gravity. The sound of Rubio's words filled it, but they were no longer landing. His voice echoed, too loud, too fast, losing shape. She still didn't interrupt. That was the difference. He believed interruption meant dominance. She knew restraint meant control. Every insult he layered made her silence heavier, sharper, more deliberate. He turned a page, slammed his pen down, half smiling as though he'd scored a point no one else had noticed. "Congresswoman, if you're going to come to this committee to grandstand about Florida's insurance market, at least do your homework. These are complex issues. It's not about feelings." The words hung there, brittle. Crockett looked up slowly, finally meeting his gaze. The smirk faltered for half a breath. Her stillness had weight now. Even the cameras seemed to lean in, waiting for her to move. The narrator's voice slid through the silence, low and electric. The air in the room changed. The power shifted. For the first time, Rubio realized he wasn't leading the moment anymore. He was feeding it. The rhythm of her breathing became the only sound that mattered. The audience could almost hear it. Slow, calm, deliberate. Every inch of her silence was a countdown. Then came the 6 seconds that changed everything.
Rubio's voice was cracking now, his rhythm collapsing under its own weight. The sound that once filled the chamber like a sermon had turned sharp, metallic, strained. He gestured too much, his hand slicing the air as if motion could hold his argument together. You can't just blame the state for federal inaction," he barked, words tumbling over one another. "This is about fiscal responsibility, not feelings, not fear-mongering. We can't keep pretending climate hysteria—" He stopped mid-sentence, breath catching, sweat beginning to gather beneath the collar of his crisp white shirt. The cameras caught it. The glint under the harsh lighting, the falter in his polished performance. Across from him, Jasmine Crockett didn't move. Her stillness was surgical. Every second she waited was another thread unraveling from his composure. The final words left his mouth like a sigh, not a statement. "If people can't afford insurance, that's not on me. That's on the market." Silence. 6 seconds. 1. Her hands rested, fingertips touching, no tremor in her posture. 2. The air thickened. Reporters stopped typing. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. 3. Rubio looked up, expecting rebuttal, interruption, anything to break the quiet. 4. She drew a single breath, slow and precise, like someone loading the truth into a chamber. 5. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and for the first time all day, he blinked first. 6. Then she spoke. "Senator," she began, voice calm, deliberate, every syllable weighted with control. "You keep saying this isn't about feelings, but let's talk about facts." Her tone didn't rise, it cut. "Florida's insurance premiums are the highest in the nation. You know how many carriers have left since you took office? 14. 14 companies pulled out because your donors let them write the rules. And while your people drown, literally drown, you call that the market working?" She leaned forward slightly, just enough to close the distance without breaking decorum. The sound of her voice filled the chamber like something sacred. "You stand here denying climate urgency while begging for federal money every time a hurricane wipes out another county. You take checks from the same corporations that price out your own voters, then call it fiscal discipline?" The words hit like glass breaking. No shouting, no theatrics, just truth stripped bare. Rubio shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the committee chair, but no one moved to interrupt her. She went on. Leadership isn't hiding behind excuses, Senator. Leadership is accountability. Leadership is telling the people of Florida the truth, that deregulation didn't free them, it buried them. That insurance greed didn't come from Washington, it came from Tallahassee. She paused again, letting the silence swell, a conductor guiding tension into melody. And let's talk about your donors, she said, softly, as almost an afterthought, but the words carried iron. The same corporations funding your campaigns are the ones writing these loopholes. They profit while your constituents pay triple for coverage they'll never use, because their homes are already gone. That's not leadership, that's negligence.
Every word landed with the precision of a scalpel. Rubio's jaw tightened. He gave a thin smile, eyes flicking toward the cameras. With all due respect, Congresswoman. She didn't let him finish. Senator, if leadership is silence while your people drown, maybe it's time Florida got a new captain. The room froze. A half-second of stunned disbelief, then 2, then 3. Aides shifted in their seats. Someone stifled a gasp. Across the chamber, a flashbulb popped. Rubio's smile wavered, faltered, then vanished entirely. He reached for his papers, but found nothing to say. The sound of his own breathing betrayed him. The camera zoomed closer, searching for reaction. Crockett didn't look at him again. She turned back to the committee chair, expression serene, her focus already moving on. The kind of composure that says, argument over. The narrator's voice returned, slow and reverent. In those 6 seconds, truth spoke louder than a decade of noise. The silence broke in a dozen tiny ways. Shifting chairs, muffled whispers, the whir of camera lenses focusing. The energy in the room had changed, as if everyone understood that they had just witnessed the moment power cracked. Rubio stared straight ahead, blinking, the smirk gone, replaced by something smaller. Not defeat exactly, but recognition. The awareness of a man who had just been measured and found wanting. Jasmine Crockett leaned back, collected her notes, and waited for the chair to move to the next item on the agenda. Outside the chamber, word was already spreading. Phones vibrated in the pockets of aides, reporters typed frantic notes, and somewhere in the control room, a producer whispered, "We've got it. That's the clip." But inside the chamber, the quiet lingered, thick, reverent, alive. It wasn't victory she sought, it was accountability. And she had delivered it with the precision of a scalpel, the force of a tidal wave contained in calm. The narrator's voice lowered to a whisper, the kind that feels like it belongs in history. The shock waves didn't stop in that chamber, they tore across the nation. It happened faster than anyone expected. Within minutes of the exchange, clips of Jasmine Crockett's line, "Maybe it's time Florida got a new captain," began spreading like wildfire across social media. By nightfall, #FloridaFirestorm was trending in all 50 states. On TikTok, creators remixed her words over storm footage, overlaying thunderclaps with her calm, cutting delivery. On X, journalists replayed the 6-second silence before she spoke, calling it the most surgical pause in political history. Instagram reels looped the mic drop moment with captions like, "Silence, 1, arrogance, 0. Cable networks couldn't resist. Every late-night host had their spin, the kind where laughter and awe bleed together. One compared Rubio's stunned expression to a man realizing live on air that volume isn't policy. Another played the clip 3 times in a row, each time slower, just to savor the recoil in his eyes. The audience roared. Then came the celebrities. A-list actors, activists, athletes, all quoting her words. "Maybe it's time America got a new captain," one post read, shared over 1 million times.
Even those who rarely waded into politics reposted the clip, calling it the truth we've been waiting to hear said out loud. The phrase became shorthand for standing your ground. It was on mugs, shirts, bumper stickers before the weekend hit.
In Florida, it hit harder. Homeowners started posting videos from flooded streets, collapsed roofs, cracked foundations, stories long ignored, now echoing through Crockett's voice. "She said what we've been screaming for years," one woman said, standing knee-deep in water outside her house. "They blame us for staying, but where are we supposed to go?" Her video racked up 2 million views overnight. Meanwhile, Rubio's press team scrambled. They released a statement calling the exchange a distraction from serious policy debate. But the phrasing, cold, dismissive, robotic, only fueled the flames. Another statement followed, trying to spin his tone as passionate concern for fiscal discipline. Commentators tore it apart. "He's explaining, not leading. That's the sound of damage control, not conviction." The narrative had shifted. It was no longer about party lines or ideology. It was about dignity versus distortion. Crockett had spoken with precision where others had shouted with pride, and the people chose her. The narrator's voice returned, low and deliberate. It wasn't just a viral moment. It was a mirror held up to power. Across the country, small-town mayors quoted her words in local meetings. Teachers played the clip in civics classes. Activists stitched it into campaign ads for accountability and truth. Even those who disagreed with her politics admitted they felt the impact, that something about the way she stood still while power unraveled felt right. By Monday morning, the headlines had changed tone. The Crockett effect, one paper called it. How 6 seconds rewired political decorum. Another headline read, "Silence, the new weapon of truth." And somewhere in Washington, aides from both parties were studying the footage, analyzing how a moment of composure dismantled a decade of performance. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't post victory tweets. She simply returned to work, as if the storm she started was just another day's duty. But everyone else felt it, that rare sense of collective clarity. For once, truth wasn't an echo. It was the sound of the tide turning. But virality fades. What endures is the lesson left behind. Later, sitting in a quiet office far from the glare of the cameras, Jasmine Crockett reflected on the moment that had swept across the nation. Her hands rested on the table, fingers intertwined, voice calm yet carrying the weight of all she represented. It's not about me versus him. It's about truth versus convenience. It's about choosing what is right over what is easy, what is fair over what is fashionable, what is necessary over what is comfortable. The narration expands, drawing the moment beyond politics, beyond party lines, into something timeless. This confrontation becomes a parable for the modern era, a story of courage in the face of noise, of accountability in a world eager for appearances. It is a reminder that the smallest act of integrity can resonate far beyond its immediate stage, shaping not just policy, but hearts and expectations. Courage is louder than silence. Truth is sharper than deception. Integrity is heavier than spectacle. Images of her constituents flash across the screen. Families once silenced, now speaking. Teachers inspiring students with her example. Activists pointing to her composure as proof that one person can bend the arc of attention back toward justice. Every frame carries the emotional crescendo of a nation reclaiming a moment of moral clarity, of seeing that power is not always the loudest voice, but sometimes the calmest, most deliberate. Her words return to the forefront. When truth stands tall, even the storm bows, even arrogance falters, even noise is reduced to silence. The camera lingers on her face, eyes reflecting a mix of determination and empathy, as though she carries every story she has ever heard within her gaze.
The narrator underscores this lesson, slow and deliberate, as if engraving it into memory. Heroes still exist in government. Courage still matters. The work of listening,
of understanding, of standing when others falter, is still sacred. The room seems to expand with the weight of possibility, a slow, uplifting musical swell accompanying the images, reminding the audience that integrity can echo farther than any shout. The lesson is clear. Power without accountability is empty, but accountability with courage reverberates across generations. This is the true victory, one that outlasts headlines, hashtags, and soundbites, a reminder that morality, once acted upon, is unstoppable. And that's why your voice, right now, matters more than ever. You just witnessed composure conquer chaos. But this isn't the end. It's the beginning of a movement demanding truth in power. The moment you saw wasn't just a confrontation between two politicians. It was a reminder that integrity can still break through the noise, that courage can still redefine the rules, and that accountability can still echo when silence would have been easier. Now it's your turn. Subscribe to stay connected to the stories that matter. Share this video so others can see that truth can and must stand tall. Stand with those who speak when silence is profitable. Amplify the voices who refuse to let power hide behind optics and arrogance. The screen fades. Bold music rises, carrying the energy of resolve and vigilance. The words appear slowly, deliberately. Truth, courage, reckoning. And as they linger, the reminder settles in. The fight for integrity is ongoing, but together, the people's voice is unstoppable.